If you had friends like anybody, you can navigate the razor's edge. If you're on your own, that's a really scary place to be. And I think it really speaks to, well, all friendships in general and how we all need to have other people with us. And when you have other people with you, whether you just have a few friends or one friend to navigate the big wide world, everything's possible if you have friends.
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for parents to seek the same in their own lives while striving to be the best versions of themselves each day. No matter who you are or where you came from, with increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is Hometown Friends, Nostalgia and the Stories That Define Us, with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Chandler Hoffman. Chandler is a licensed clinical psychologist in California who is an expert in healthy relationships and peacemaking. This specialization was developed professionally as a family law mediator and forensic psychologist, working with families going through divorce and separation. His work with the Superior Court of California in making child custody decisions for these families led to his expertise in this area, and after leaving the courts, he launched his private practice, Amity Consulting, where he provides clinical consultation, co-parenting, and mediation services to individuals, parents, and children. Chandler's passion for healthy relationships led him to launch his podcast called Hometown Friends, where he explores the powerful connections of our most fundamental friendships and the profound sense of belonging that comes from the identification of being from somewhere and connected to someone. Chandler, my friend, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's really good to be here. Appreciate you having me.
All right, we've been talking about this for a while, and we're doing it.
Yeah, this is great. I always wanted to be on a podcast, so I've been interviewing a lot of people recently, and I wanted to be in the guest chair, so I appreciate being here.
It's different. It's really different, and we're going to have fun. So we're going to talk all about your podcast because I've been diving into it, and I guess my first question is from child custody evaluator and forensic psychologist, right? Mm-hmm. That's a whole, and as we've talked about, that's an intense field, really important work. Something I've said, like, that's not for me. That's just that's a lot, and I have a lot of respect for that. To a podcast, which is so different. It's so different in content and feeling, but I do see the connection of healthy relationship and how that impacts us. So tell everyone your story of creating this.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a personal story. And I think it does connect to the idea of healthy relationships in general in my life and what I needed to do, I think, as a personal story. It really comes from being from a family that, well, my mom was an alcoholic. She died in May last year, and I went into therapy and started a mindfulness practice and really started to reflect on my own life. And I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and basically do my mindfulness practice. And then all these memories would basically start pouring out of me. And I realized that I had to survive my mom's alcoholism and the ways that she really was an amazing person, right? There's no shade on my mom. She's gone, and I really had to really understand the conflicts in my life with her. She was an amazing civil rights activist. She led people in song and galvanized their voices. She was in the South. I was born in Atlanta. And then we came to California when I was 5. And she was an amazing mother. And she also disappointed me and abandoned me in a lot of ways. And so I realized that I had to survive in different ways. I'll tell you one story that came up on her deathbed, and I think it led to this project. My mom, I was holding her hand, and she was about 2 weeks before she died. And I was stroking her hand and being really as kind as I could be, although I'd had a lot of conflicting feelings about her. And she said, "Chandler, I have this memory." And I was like, "Okay, Mom, tell me." And she said, "You're in diapers, and we're in this home in Atlanta, and all of a sudden, I can't find you. And I hear a knock at the door, and I'm looking for you, but then I hear this knock at the door, and this woman is at the door with you in her arms." And she's like, "Lady, is this your child?" And she's like, "Oh my God, yeah, that's my child." And she said, "Your child was out on the street." Wow. And there were cars. This is a busy street, and there were cars flying by. And I stopped and picked up your baby, and I came to this house, and here's your child. And I was like, "Whoa, Mom, you've never even told me that story before." And she's like, "I guess I just lost track of you, Chandler." And it really made, it actually fit very well into many of the stories that I have about my mom, where she just lost track of me. And I think she just didn't have the capabilities she had 7 kids. I was her last of 7 children. She was an alcoholic and a civil rights activist and very involved in the movement. And I was kind of an afterthought, seemingly. And that story really launched me into this idea of like, how the hell did I survive that kind of parent? And it led me to start to remember all of the friendships that I had had from a very early age that helped me thrive. And they started with another story of very early age friendship. My mom we were in Atlanta. We were in this public housing project. We were the only white family in that project. And I had a little friend who was named Little Winston. In fact, they called him Lil Winston. It was definitely from Atlanta and the southern accent. And my mom took a bunch of these kids that were part of the apartment complex to this place called Stone Mountain Regional Park. And all these older kids and me and Little Winston, we piled into her blue station wagon. And we rolled out to Stone Mountain. We got to the parking lot. We parked. We opened the back. It was like the 70s, so you like pile in the back, no seatbelts.
Yep.
We rolled out. All these kids knew that there was a swimming hole. So we followed all these big kids into the woods, the stone cliffs in the background, and we found this swimming hole. And we all stripped off our clothes, and it was a hot day in Atlanta in July 1974. And we all went swimming in this beautiful little pond. And when the sun started to go down and the wind started to pick up, the kids were like, "We got to get out of here. We got to go home or go back." And me and Little Winston got out of the water, and all the big kids had gone. And we started to panic. I was crying, looking, yelling, and no one was there. And Little Winston and I looked around for them, but they weren't around, but we found these train tracks that went through the park. And we started walking down the train tracks. Well, I had bare feet. It was a hot day in Atlanta. I don't know where my shoes were, but all of a sudden I got a splinter in my foot, and I, pulled out the splinter, started crying. I was really feeling scared still. And then on the other foot, I got a cut from the rocks in between the tracks. And then I put my foot on the rail that had been baking in the hot sun and just scalded my feet and just collapsed. And Little Winston was walking a little ahead of me, and he came back and he sat down next to me, and he had boots on. And I remember him looking at me and pulling off one of his boots and giving me that boot. And I immediately stopped crying. And I put on the boot. He had one boot and I had the other. And we walked down the tracks to this main train station and found the parking lot where my mom's car was.
Wow.
And I never forgot about little Winston's ability to help me in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And he taught me how to be a friend right then and there. And I was 5 years old. And I never actually after that moment, I don't remember a lot of little Winston because we went to California probably a couple weeks after that. And I don't know where this guy is. I don't know if he's still alive, what his life has been like. But that moment taught me everything about being a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to California, I had a series of friendships that were similar to that. That's a good story, but there's a million of them.
Yeah.
And I started to have all these thoughts about these people, these moments in my life where they saved me.
Yeah.
They were there. They were my surrogate attachment figures.
Yeah.
And I realized I wanted to do a homage to these people that have made such a difference in my life, but I can only imagine in other people's lives. So I launched this podcast to explore these kinds of friendships and these stories. And I wanted to tell my own. And Berkeley is a great place to come from. And I identify with it. And, it goes on, but it's really about this idea of belonging somewhere and having a sense of belonging with your friends. And that just saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I would have become a psychologist. There's so many people that have made a difference. You, Dan, have made an amazing difference in my life because, I have a story about that one too, but coming out of the court system and being so afraid to take the risk of becoming a psychologist in private practice and not knowing what I was going to do. And you just saying, man, I'll give you a job. And you gave me a job. And that helped me so much.
As I've been listening to your podcast, I hear so many times when you and your friend in different ways say, wow, I hadn't even thought of that. And that is something that I had forgot, because when I think of our friendship, who of course we were introduced by one of my closest friends, my brother, right? A brother to me, Rich. And then we hit it off immediately and we're talking. And then, so what I remember is our conversations. I remember our conversations and our connections and, cheering for you and making this step. But I totally have blocked out that we did have that stint, right? Where we were working together and collaborating. And that was part of the stepping off point. Like I literally that did not. So we have these stories and we have these memories and we have these feelings, but we don't always remember the details until someone else comes to it, like in your podcast, and says, hey, remember that? And you're like, oh, wow.
It's like collective memory, actually.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So Berkeley. So I've been learning way more about Berkeley I thought I knew a lot about Berkeley. I started coming to Berkeley when I was in college, having come to Northern California. And then we have friends who grew up in Berkeley, who still live in Berkeley, and you know how that goes, and have spent a lot of time in Berkeley over the last 30 plus years, listening about Berkeley and growing up in Berkeley. And I think also at the time that you grew up there, we're the similar age, that time. Wow. Like there is so much, there's so much grit. There's so much real life. There was it was like growing up fast. These stories, like you guys were growing up fast. And as I've learned through some of your core friendships, like people had these sliding doors, like moments where some people made it and like you, right?
Yeah.
Made it
Yeah.
and have a wonderful family, wife and kids and profession, and other people who are just as solid individuals by other events that were going on when you were there,
Totally.
um, went a whole different direction. And I hear that over and over. So what is it about? What was it about Berkeley? I mean, there's a lot of the specialness we'll talk about, but what is it about that razor's edge almost? Like you could go this way or you could go this way.
Yeah. Well, they say something about Berkeley High School. First of all, there's only one high school in Berkeley, or the public high school, and everybody feeds into that. There's many other schools, but we all feed into Berkeley High. So Berkeley High School is kind of a special place because Berkeley itself is like a small town in a big city, right? And it has everything of a big city, and it feels very close and connected as a small town. Obviously we were exposed, and it was the 70s, right? We were running feral.
Yeah.
Our parents were not paying that much attention to us, and I hear this theme over and over and over that we were let out of the nest, and we were expected to survive, and we thrived in lots of ways by being with each other. Now, we didn't have the internet, we were bored all the time, so we were connecting, we were finding spaces, real spaces to connect. And those were in parks and at school. Obviously, you saw your people at school all the time, and you ran around and you took the public transportation, and we were running the streets and being on bikes, and we would see each other. And there were certain neighborhoods for sure that people would see each other over and over again. And so you got to know the people in your neighborhood, or you got to, I mean, for me, I didn't even live in the neighborhoods that I was hanging out with. I was trying to, as I reflect on it, I was hanging out with kids that I wanted to be like. I wanted to be like Richard Stroud, who I interviewed in my third interview. I wanted to have the families that these other people had. So I was hanging out with, truthfully, kids that weren't in poverty, kids that were rich, kids that had two-parent households. My parents were divorced, and I was closer to my dad in a lot of ways. It's one of the reasons I think I became a custody expert, is because of my own experience with divorced parents. But being in Berkeley was like the wild, wild west. But so it's super exciting, but also really scary.
Mm-hmm.
And having friends, for me, gave me the confidence to navigate the big wide world. Mm-hmm. If you had friends, like anybody, you can navigate the razor's edge. If you're on your own,
right,
that's a really scary place to be. Mm-hmm. And I think it really speaks to, well, all friendships in general, and how we all need to have other people with us. And when you have other people with you, whether you're in a gang or you just have a few friends or one friend to navigate the big wide world, mm-hmm. everything's possible if you have friends. And I think there was a survival instinct for me, is like, find these people, be nice to them, listen to them, be vulnerable with them. I didn't tell all my friends all of what was going on in my life, but I was a good friend somehow. I think starting from, being influenced by Little Winston and mm-hmm. Carvel in my first grade. These people took me into their homes. They mm-hmm. showed me what it was like mm-hmm. to have resource. And these parents, they don't even remember all of it. I thank them all the time. And they're like, Chandler, you don't have to thank us. We were just being parents to mm-hmm. these kids. But man, the appreciation and the gratitude that I have for all these small moments of people being with me, loving me, taking me into their houses, sitting on their front porches, sharing their lives with me, mm-hmm. sharing their resources with me, made all the difference in the world to be able to navigate the wild west of Berkeley, California in the 70s.
Well, there's something about you. I mean, that's always been my experience, although I didn't know you when you were younger and growing up during these periods. But there is something about you that is contagious. Like you're a connector. You're a people person. You listen. You're compassionate. So I'm wondering what you think about the part of you that also allowed that, because not all kids, unfortunately, are as easy to take in and to do for. So there was something about you as well.
Yeah, you're probably right. Of course, it's hard to, it's, I don't know. I don't know what it is about me sort of just naturally. I think I have a warm heart. I think that's the kind of feedback that people have always given me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just love human beings, and I always wanted to be a psychologist since I was in 8th grade. I said to myself, I'm going to be a psychologist, and I didn't know what that even meant. I didn't have a psychologist. I didn't know what that was going to be like, but I knew I could. I knew people talked to me. I knew people wanted to share with me. I knew that I wanted to be around people and that I wanted to make people's lives better.
Mm-hmm.
And friendship has always been my superpower.
Yeah.
And Dan, you work with all these kids. You gave me this great opportunity to work with kids on the spectrum and kids with ADHD and kids who really struggle in so many ways, but then they always have this superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a beautiful thing to be able to work with you and to see your focus on finding that superpower, finding that thing that stands out, that makes them the great person that they are. And I think that was my superpower. My superpower was making friends, sustaining them, and having people love me and to take me in and to be willing to share their lives with me and their resources with me and to be a good friend. And I was a terrible student. I mean, I looked at some of my grades I remember, I've said this in my podcast. My teacher said, "You are passing by the skin of your teeth, Chandler."
Right.
And I was a terrible student, but I knew that I could be a good psychologist because of this superpower, right?
Yeah.
And these people reflected that back to me. And I think that's what my hometown friends have always done. They reflected the best parts of myself back to me. They mirrored this. I had a secure attachment to my friends, and I had an insecure attachment to my own mother.
Yep. Yeah. The learning challenges, that's another theme on the podcast that comes up, which is really fascinating. And I know you and so it was with Matt. I think it was Matt or Mark Conway.
Yes, most recent one, the 10th episode. Mark Conway.
So Mark, right. So Mark talked about, not being a good reader, not being a good writer, never feeling smart. And obviously has found his way and done quite well with his superpower.
Yep.
You talk about not, also having trouble with reading and writing, and you and I share the D word, like the undiagnosed adult dyslexic.
Totally.
As we find out through our children and our work. And I wanted to comment on that as well, related to what you just said, because you, of course, felt less than coming from poverty and not having what other people had, right? So there's this automatic feeling of less than when we have less. And then there's this layer that I very much identify with, which is feeling less than because you have a learning difference. You're not seen as smart. You don't feel as smart. Your friends are able to do things. You don't realize at the time when you're young, you generally hang out with people who have a similar amount of intelligence and interests, but that's different than actually being able to learn in the way that it's being taught.
Totally.
And so I was thinking about that as I was listening to the podcast and wondering how that has also impacted your humility. When you don't come into this thinking that you're the shit, you come into this thinking like, I don't know, accept me, like me, it comes in with like less self-confidence, which takes, in my experience, a long time to grow until you find out what you're good at. You do it enough, and then you get confidence there, even though you still have these insecurities in these other areas.
Totally. I think that's exactly right. I think there was a humility that came from feeling like I was not the best. I was never the best student. I was never the best athlete. I was never the best at really anything, right? And I think Well, except for making friends.
Yeah.
I think I was pretty good at that. And so I always depended on that. And that took me a long way. No matter where I went, I could make friends. And I was unabashed at talking to people. And I still love to just meet lots of people. I feel like I have a huge bandwidth for friendships and connections. But I do think that, it's interesting, I think, for, all parents to know that if your kids actually have it hard, there's some actual advantage to that. Like that actually it's better when you don't have everything going for you, that you're not the top of your class or that you're not the most popular, that you're going to learn something from that. And I think you just hit on it, which is that there's a humility there that you never think you've grown or you never think you've achieved anything. Now, you want a good healthy balance of that. You want to have confidence in certain areas. And I was able to work at a lot of things. I was able to get a doctorate.
Yeah.
And I could not read in first grade. My friend taught me how to read.
Yes.
My mom was a very, very educated woman. She read to me. My father read to me. I just couldn't put that together. I was dyslexic, as you said, undiagnosed. I didn't know that. I didn't know that about myself, but I was always like, damn, why is it so hard?
Right.
And my kids, I had to really help my kids with that, and especially my son, and I think my daughter too, but she was just so, obsessive about it all. I think she compensated that way. Yeah. And I think, my wife is diagnosed. She actually had the kind of family that diagnosed her. And so she knows she had these learning differences. And so we have the genetic, passed down of both our children.
When you reached out to some of your friends, and the one that, there's a couple that really stuck with me, and you had mentioned Rich Stroud, like that episode, which you suggested was the first one for me to listen to. And that's a long episode, but it doesn't feel long because you're in it. And here's a guy who you haven't talked to in a very long time, like really connected with in a very long time. But it was like everything came back. The conversation was like you guys were still back when you were close friends. And that period was middle school when you guys were super tight. And then his just trajectory. And here's someone who you talk about, you coming from poverty and him coming from privilege and prestige. And it just goes to show just the different paths and how he was able to talk about his addiction, like stuff that you had heard about and thought, but you didn't, like that he was able to go there with you in such a vulnerable way and such an honest way while he's still on his road to health and recovery. Like it was so powerful and powerful for him, right? I know these are powerful for you because I hear you throughout these, but powerful for him. And what was the experience of that? How blown away were you from that conversation?
Oh man, I've been blown away by pretty much every conversation, but there are some real personal ones that blew me away. And that was certainly one of the first ones. I mean, he's so articulate and great storyteller, really educated. His parents are super educated. So he uses all these big words. And I mean, he was all like, I tell this story on the podcast, like his parents made him take the SATs in 8th grade. I didn't even know what the SATs were.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, I'm taking a Saturday to take the SATs. So like this guy he taught me so much about friendship, but he also was dealing with things I didn't know about. And so how powerful it was to revisit a friendship. First of all, you're right. These hometown friends, from my perspective, are long-term friendships that when you are in adolescence with someone, these are foundational to the kinds of people that you are. They reflect who you are. It's adolescent development. I mean, it's identity formation. As we as psychologists, we know this is Erik Erikson 101, right? You're an adolescent. You're figuring out who you are. Who am I? And in relationship to other people. And so going into that interview or being in that interview with Rich was amazing. First of all, one of the things you talked about before is this collective memory. I knew what he did for me, but I didn't know what I did for him.
Right.
That's a whole different thing about having these kinds of conversations. And you realize who you were for other people when you then dive into these kinds of long, conversations with people that you've known for a long time that you revisit. And you never get a chance to do these conversations unless somebody's dying or you're really drunk or something, right? And it never really, it's not like a sober moment when you have these conversations where like, let's talk about our friendship. And again, I came with it with a lot of gratitude. Like, thank you, Rich, for being who you were. You've struggled so much in your life with addiction and just trauma.
Right.
And I had no idea about all of that. And so listening to that and being in that is super powerful for me. But you're right. I think my guests get something extremely significant and powerful about being in that seat.
Huge. It is therapeutic. And even so, Carvel even said that. Okay, so Carvel was the last one I listened to. And Carvel, your first friend when you came to Berkeley.
Right. First grade.
And he was breaking down during the conversation. And you guys separated, I think around middle school, sounds like. Sometime end of elementary school, not sure why. Nothing happened.
No.
But here you are, 35, 40? I don't know.
Yeah, 38 50. Years later, something like that from high school.
And that connection and all those memories and how much he is seeking connection. How much he is seeking connection. And at the end, what was so powerful was as you were guiding him, because he wants community, and he's talking about how much, the world has changed and we're all on our phones, and you're talking about how, we have these kind of pseudo or pretend relationships that we think are relationships, but a lot of people are still really lonely and not connecting. And you were asking him, well, what would you suggest to people? And I'm saying to myself, Chandler, ask him what he would do differently. What would he do differently? Because he's talking about that Trader Joe experience and how he had this joy and gave other people joy. And I'm thinking, I'm like, Carvel, you have this in you, man. You can reach out. People want to connect with you. You're clearly a special person. And then you ask him the question so strategically and beautifully. And he said, well, I guess what I'll say is what I would say to myself. And right. So he went right there and he goes, Chandler, this has been therapeutic. I mean, that connection and the memories. I think even what you're hitting upon intentionally and or intuitively is that even by revisiting these relationships, there's healing in that. And there is this positive attachment and this connection that happens just by going back and revisiting the power of the relationships.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And I want to say that, what I said to Carvel when I talked to him on my podcast is I was like, you're dealing with a loss of community. And, there was a moment in there where he said something like, Chandler, I always kept my eye on you. And then I saw you at a party and I met your wife. And then you handed me your baby. And he broke down and said, there was in this powerful way, you let me hold your baby. And the subcontext to that is like, no one looks at me and just gives me their baby. We have this loyalty. We have this bond that is never broken. I am your brother. You are my brother. We are so connected. You will let me hold your most valuable, precious thing.
Yeah.
And that really struck me. And now I want to say that I've intentionally been connecting with Carvel. I didn't want this to just be an exposure of his vulnerability. I wanted this to be, well, I was inspired to reconnect with Carvel. I've taken him out to dinner. We've gone to shows. I invited him to a political garden party that I just wanted, got invited to. We've been connecting. Nice. And he's thanked me, but it's moreover, I just thank him for being a great friend to me in first grade. And literally, you're right. He's a special person. There's no reason why he shouldn't have a community. I'm not going to let this guy down. I can't let this person, his other thing, he said, like, his mom thought he would just be in jail. He's a black man. She thought he would be in jail or and he's not thriving necessarily because he doesn't have all that community that I think a lot of people do. And when you have it, you better be grateful for it because it's not taken, you can't be taking it for granted. And I think for me, it's been a great connection, a reconnection of someone that really meant a lot to me. And he's a good dude and I really enjoy his company. Yeah.
I was thinking about that when he had said that his mom had told him, I just kind of gave up on you and because I thought you were going to end up in jail. And what's fascinating, without knowing anything about the story, I'm always thinking about that, the multi-generation and the transmission and of course the parent footprint. Totally. And as Carvel was talking, he didn't ever do anything like that. The worst thing he did is, which we'll talk about fear, is, he started cutting school and playing basketball. Like, so he, everyone's cutting school, he's smoking a little weed, he's drinking a little, but it sounds like nothing different than many of the people were doing at the time. And so what was it about his mom's life and the men in her life that she would have this assumption about this sweet man who I'm sure was a very sweet boy.
Sweet man.
Right? And so that stuck with me for our awareness, for us to keep being aware of how, is this feeling, this thought, this behavior, is this because of something that's happening right now? Or is this something because of what has happened to me and around me? Such an important question.
Yeah.
But then the fear came up, where he talked about he was always scared. He was just always scared at school, couldn't wait to get out of school. And then you were talking about like your fear. He was talking about his fear of failure. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's been my big one. That's been with me most of my life. I think partly the learning issue, partly just my personality. I don't know, firstborn, but those things are real.
They are.
And when we keep them inside and we don't tell anyone, you're just carrying it by yourself. And so I'm going back to you and the difference between you and him from a personality perspective. You were one that always sought out. You sought out and more extroverted, just to oversimplify it. And then Carvel strikes me as much more introverted. And it's like, I just go within. He went to the library. He went to books. You guys had some great teachers and some pretty crappy teachers. And then so it was like when he would have a crappy teacher, I'm saying it was just more confirmation that they're not interested in me. I got to do all this on my own.
Right.
And I feel like because of your resilience and your personality and your inner fire, for lack of a better word, you're like, all right, well, that one didn't work. I'm going to try this one.
Yeah.
And it just speaks to this resilience building and how we get it and how we foster it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think resilience is a great word because it really does get people up off the ground, so to speak, right? When you fall down 7 times, you get up 8, there's all kinds of statements around that. But and for me, it was always these other people, that these other friends made me feel like I could get up again. Certainly my folks, certainly my family had something to do with that. I think you're right, though. The personality has so much to do with it. It's like next, right? There's nothing was going to get in my way of making connection with the next person or achieving that next goal, because I wanted so desperately to get out of poverty. I also, I've never said this, but I was a big kid. I was a fat kid. I was the fat kid in most of my grade school. So I got teased a lot. And that comes up in a couple of my, both the Carvel episode and in
Rich
and with Rich.
Yeah.
But, so I had to figure out ways to be resilient there too, right? To laugh at myself and take away people's power. Because if somebody's teasing you and you're laughing at the same thing, they're like, well, I guess, you're okay, kid.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Got to go pick on somebody else.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that was a huge resiliency, is like, make it work. How are you going to make this okay?
Yeah.
And instead of, man, of course I had a lot of pain and suffering about that too. Yeah. But I also changed that. In ninth grade, I went away to live with my father in the East Coast in suburban Maryland. And I had no friends, literally no friends. Now, I got on the baseball team. I was a pretty good baseball player and I was able to get on a team. But, Maryland's a very different place than Berkeley. I mean, first of all, Black people and white people did not hang out. There was no mixture. And that was my whole world, is like a multicultural way of being, where I loved hip hop. I was like into hip hop music. So that was Black people's music. So I was drawn to the Black community. I had grown up, I had all these images of growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, where I was the only white kid. So I was drawn to the Black community. But that was not happening in Maryland. They were like, dude, stop talking to us, And I was like, shit. And so that was a real challenge for me. But I lost 50 pounds that year. My dad helped me lose a lot of weight. And I came back to Berkeley, and I would have stayed in Maryland because I was from, eighth grade. I had probably the best friendship group I had ever had. These are my hometown friends. I've interviewed a few of them, Jess and Jen being several of them, Rich being another. And I loved my father. My father, I had spent probably 20% of time as a custody expert. I know this.
Yeah.
I probably spent maybe 10 to 20% of time with my father. And I spent, most of my time with my mother in California. But when I went to live with him, he was a great, great parent. He gave me all the things that I needed from a resource perspective. He was middle class. My mom was more in poverty. So that was better in a lot of ways, but I didn't have the friendships. Now I lost 50 pounds and I became a whole different body type, and I had a whole different sort of confidence about me, about my looks and my body. But I went back to Berkeley for 10th grade because it was all about my friends, right? I could not, I loved my father and I didn't actually want to go back to live with my mom, but I could not stay away from my hometown friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we understand why. We understand why, man.
They were my secure attachment. Yeah. They were the people I had fun with. They were the people that were teaching me things. They were the people I could depend on.
Yeah. I think of these connections. So before, this was after, probably around the time we talked about doing the show together.
Yeah.
But not that I was focused on your podcast. I kept having these pings, and I had this friend who was a close friend in kindergarten, first grade, and then he ended up going to different schools in the area, and then we reconnected in high school, and we were very close friends in high school and after high school. And then he was at my wedding, and we drifted. We just drifted. At some point, we drifted, and I kept thinking about him. I just, all of a sudden, this is in like the last 3 months, I kept thinking about him and thinking about him. God, I've got to call him. I just got to reach out. And I told my wife, and I'm like, God, I just keep thinking about him. And she's like, yeah, well, that might mean something. So I kept thinking and thinking and thinking. And, I'm going to call him today. I'm going to call him today, or I'm going to text him today. And then finally I did. And I don't even know how long it's been. And I said, hey, man, I'm checking in on you. I've been thinking a lot about you. How's it going? And he's like, well, I'm doing okay now, but let me tell you what's been going on. And he had this whole cancer scare, multiple, like during this whole 3-month period. Talk about a connection. right?
Totally.
And then we kept trying. We're like, okay, dude, I gotta FaceTime you. Like, we gotta see each other, and it just didn't work. And so this is probably now a month ago. And now as we've been talking, I'm like, man, I'm just gonna FaceTime him. Like, I just gotta forget about working on the time. Like, I just gotta FaceTime him because, again, when we were texting, it's like, it's just right back. The language is the same. It's just all those memories just come back. And like when we were talking, when we had coffee, all these memories define us. They literally define us. Like, our parents obviously serve a very important purpose, which can go in all different directions. But it's those friendships and those memories of the first times, or the how did we pull that off, or oh my God, like, I had your back, or you had my back, or just also the fun, innocent times. Like, that's the tapestry that, if we're lucky to have those relationships, as you say, they not only define us, but they become who we are. And I'm going to quote you from Carvel's episode. You said, "I am in awe in the connections between people who saw me and loved me, that cared for me, reflected my intelligence back to me, and reflected my goodness back to me. It created my sense of myself."
Yeah, it's so true. And I think people have a great opportunity that we often, our brains are so negatively biased. We can easily remember the negative things, and we take lots of notice when we are in especially depressed and anxious and fearful states. We really see all the negative things. But I truly believe that if you bring to mind and you use memory in a strategic way, that you can bring to mind the ways that people loved you. You can bring to mind the way that people supported you. There's way more evidence of people being kind and supportive than there is of people being mean and bullying you. But those bullying times, they stick out, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference for people that thrive and are resilient, for those who can really bring to mind and have gratitude. And there's an agency apart that, right? There's an agency about bringing to mind the right memories, not just letting it come, but to say, I'm focusing on the ones that gave me the sense of confidence, that gave me the resilience that I needed to do all kinds of things.
Yeah. Yes, because we know that anxious memories, depressive memories, traumatic memories at different times in our lives, they can really take over.
Totally.
And a lot of the time, even when it's severe, there are little windows. There are little windows where you might have the opportunity to choose your own memory. And as you say, it's very hard to do when we have those lenses on.
Yeah.
However, those memories are all still in there, and to purposely and intentionally access them, which I believe you ended up doing through your mindfulness practice,
absolutely.
right? Getting that quiet mind. The traumatic stuff came, but also all of this other stuff came as well.
Well, I want to plug your book because that has helped me a lot too. From Worrier to Warrior was like mind blowing to me. Like, I had never really, when I read that book, it was more like therapeutic for me than when I was like teaching these kids in your, Summit Center to do this work. I was using it myself. I was scaling. I was looking for the things that allowed me to breathe. I was anxious. I was depressed. I was in real bad shape there, Dan. And that book helped me so much. It was like a roadmap to lessening this anxious, depressed, overwhelming negativity bias that my brain was going through. And it helped me sleep, and it helped me move on, and it helped me be resilient, and it helped me heal.
Wow, man. Well, thank you for saying that. It's another example of how like we don't know. Like we only know our side of things. So I had no idea. And
I got 2 copies on my shelf right now.
that makes it all worthwhile. That makes it all worthwhile. Oh, Chandler, this is good stuff, man. And I just hope that, okay, everyone listening, just think about all these people in your life that either that you might still be connected to, but probably many who you're not, from your different iterations and chapters and geographies of your life. And those people are still there. They still have the same positive feelings. And in today's world, more people are disconnected than connected. And just about everyone has room for more meaningful connections.
Yeah.
So if you need an excuse, because I know sometimes it's a little awkward if you drop off, it's like, hey, I heard this podcast that made me really think of you. And they said that we really needed to reach out to the people who have been important to us. So do it, man. Just do it, everyone,
just
right?
do it.
Do
yeah.
it. Do it.
Just take a risk. And,
Yeah.
there's that great research, which is like, you're liked way more than you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a wonderful mantra, if you will, that, we all worry about what people think about us. I think we're just more negative than we need to be.
Right. And that I'll throw in my a saying my dad has always said, which is, stop worrying what other people are thinking about you, because they're not.
Yeah. They're really not.
Everyone's got to thinking about themselves and trying to get out of their own way most of the time.
But I think even, to the next level, which is that you ask people how they think of you, and they're more positive than you think they are.
Right.
About you.
Right. Well, usually we're many of us are more positive about others than we are to ourselves. Like we would never say to others what we would say to ourselves, which is another thing for all of us to ask ourselves, right? When we are beating ourselves up. Like, would you ever say that to your close friends?
Exactly. That being your own best friend is such an important technique for resilience and for well-being. Like, how do you become your own best friend? And for me, that's really helpful to think about how people have treated me.
Yeah.
And how I can treat myself, and how I can forgive myself, and how I can be non-judgmental of myself and see my thoughts and my feelings, be aware of them, and be present in certain moments. Just let it go.
Yeah. All right, Chan. It's time for the parent footprint moment question.
Love it.
Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual, as a parent, or even an awareness of your own parents, and that new awareness had a positive impact on your life, your kids, and or those you love.
It's such a great question. I've been thinking about it, and I have so many choices. And I think this one is the one that sticks out for me. Can I say 2? Can I give 2? Okay, good. The first one, really, I think when I realized I was a parent, was my first child coming out of, I was in the hospital watching Chrissy give birth. And that blew my mind as a man, first of all. I was like, oh my God, you guys do that? And this baby came out, and we were singing to this baby. And I'm a divorce specialist, right? So I'm like, child custody, I'm worried about all this stuff. And I look at my wife, and the baby's on her breast and like on the skin to skin. And I look at her and I say, Chrissy, you and I have to remain each other's number one. And she looks at me, Dan, like I am crazy. Like, dude, there's no way you're number one. This baby is my number one. And that moment right there, I realized, oh, and it came from so much place. Like I'm not number one anymore. This baby is number one to my wife. Mm-hmm. And although it's a wise thing to say, and right now she'll tell me today on our walk, she was like, that was a wise thing to say, but read the room, Chandler.
Yeah.
This is the wrong time to say that.
Yeah.
But, and so we stay connected now. But that was a time that I really realized, oh, now I'm a parent. Now
Yeah.
I really came aware of myself and made some mistakes then. But the second one that comes from a different parent place was that as a professional trying to get my kids off to school every day, especially my son, who was late pretty much every day and would never wake up on time. And I was trying to get to work on time, and I was trying to get him to school on time. And it was I mean, just the most anxiety filled morning pretty much every morning. And I would run him to school, and it was always rushed. And he would get there, and I'd give him a peck on the cheek, and he would run in and, real quick. And then I would see this other family that was walking late to school every day, hand in hand, arm in arm. And I would like, why is it so easy for them to come in this way? And then fast forward, I was walking my kid to school and again, distracted and angry at him for being late. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, why are you still rushing when we're already late? And it all came clear to me, Dan, that I needed to exactly do what he was saying. I needed to stop rushing. I needed to stop stressing.
Yeah.
I needed to be present in the moment of every step I took with that kid. And from that moment on, like that day, I just realized that being present with my kid was the most important thing. And I call it my 15 minutes of custody. He reached his hand out to mine and grabbed my hand, and we walked to school for 15 minutes in silence that day. And we gave each other a long hug. And he looked at me and said, I love you, Dad. And it filled my heart. And I realized in that moment that as a custody expert, all I needed was 15 minutes of custody each day. And if I could be present in that moment from the beginning to the end, it would fill both our hearts, and he would never forget about me and I would never forget about him. And that people come to my office every day saying, I want 50-50. Not going to be a parent. They're all afraid that the time that they have with their children in custody is the most important thing. And I tell them, no, it's not. That it's presence, it's quality.
Yeah.
It's all about being in the moment with your children and appreciating every moment that you have, because you never know how much time you're going to have on this earth with your children. Something bad could happen. You could live till 90 and have lots of time. You just don't know. But I know from that moment on that every moment I spend with my child, and Ellery and I have this great little phrase that we use when I say, Ellery, come walk around the block with me. Come take the dog for a walk. And he's like, you want your 15 minutes of custody, Dad? And I was like, yeah.
Awesome.
And we vibe on that language, and we have a shared value around being present for very small periods of time. And that changed my life being a parent.
Wow. That is a beautiful story and important for us all to hear. And I'm going to circle it back as we wind down, which is your ability to be present with your friends, right? That comes through from all of them. That presence that you had back then and what you doing now with them. So thank you for reminding us of how important these things are that I think many of us take for granted, and how these friendships can continue to be a resource and a connection for us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to be talking to you. And you're such a great friend to me, Dan. Not only, again, I repeat that you've you've done so much for me as a friend, and I've so appreciated having you as a colleague, a professional colleague, but moreover as a friend. And you've always been open. You've always answered my call. You've always texted me back. And I don't take that for granted, man. That's like a big thing for friendships. So thank you for being a friend to me.
Oh, you are very welcome. It's mutual. Tell everyone where to find you in your practice, where to find your podcast.
Well, I have a private practice that's called Amity Consulting, and it's amityconsulting.com. And I do mostly divorce-related child custody issues. I work in collaborative divorce, and I try to say I'm a peacemaker. So I do a lot of co-parenting work with people that are going through the process, or keeping people out of the court system, because I think that, the adversarial system was something that I really tried to, keep people out of, based on my 15 years of work there. And then, I actually just formed a new foundation, a new nonprofit, where I'm hoping to launch belonging and friendship initiatives.
Nice.
And it's called Amity Foundation, and it's going to sort of house both of my consulting business, but moreover the Hometown Friends podcast, which I think is the first initiative there. It's you can go to YouTube and Hometown Friends YouTube. You can look me up on the Hometown Friends podcast on Apple and Spotify. And I have 10 episodes. I hope I will have a lot more. I'm, looking to really help as much as possible to encourage people to look at these small moments of their lives. I do think that the podcast sort of gives a protocol a little bit of like helping. Well, it just models, I think, the conversations that we have with our friends, that we can have, the deep connection that you can have from it. I also think that the facilitation of 2 or more people can be an amazing thing to do. So sort of like couples therapy for friends in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think it also can hopefully allow for younger people to realize how important these friendships are in the moment and be more aware of what they can do for them. So Hometown Friends.
Hometown Friends. And everyone, Chandler's always looking to have a conversation with anyone who wants to talk about the impact of their hometown friends in their lives. So if you want to be on a podcast and talk about these, contact him.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
All right, everyone. Please share this episode with everyone out there that you care about, those who are full of connections and those that you might think would benefit from more connections, and never underestimate the impact that you have on others through your kindness and your friendship. Thanks for being a part of our amazing community, for your 5-star reviews. And I will leave you with those 2 questions I do after every show. Try to be that person you want your child to become, and ask yourself the guiding question: what footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummer Man, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast, and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com.